Welcome back to our deep dive on climate resilience. Last time we really dug into the science of climate change, the impacts.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
We did.
Yeah.
But today we're going to shift gears a bit. We're going to move beyond just understanding the problem.
Right.
And start exploring what we can actually do about it. How to live with it, how to adapt, how to build resilience, all that.
Exactly. It's not enough to just know about climate change.
Right.
We have to figure out how to deal with it. And that's what makes this so interesting,
Yeah, totally.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works in one place might not work somewhere else.
So where do we even begin?
Well, I think a good place to start is by really defining what we mean by climate resilience and adaptation. We hear those terms all the time, but what do they actually look like in practice?
Yeah, those are good questions.
Yeah.
And luckily, our sources actually do have some specific definitions.
Oh,
One of them defines climate resilience as the ability of a system to basically bounce back from climate-related disruptions.
okay.
And that system could be anything, an ecosystem, a community, even a whole economy.
Right. Makes sense.
And then adaptation is about adjusting to climate change,
Mm-hmm.
doing things differently to minimize the negative impacts.
I think that idea of bouncing back is really important when we talk about resilience.
Oh, how so?
It's not just about surviving a climate event, It's about being able to recover and actually thrive afterward.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, imagine a tree in a hurricane.
Okay, yeah.
A resilient tree bends with the wind, maybe loses a few branches,
Yeah.
but it ultimately springs back up after the storm passes.
I like that. But adaptation is more like giving that tree extra support beforehand.
Yeah.
Like a stronger root system or a more flexible trunk, something that helps it withstand the force of the hurricane in the first place.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And it's interesting because one of the sources emphasizes community-based adaptation as being a really key part of this.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Well, because local communities often have, the deepest understanding of their own vulnerabilities
Yeah.
and what solutions will actually work in their specific context. They have the traditional knowledge. They've lived in these places for generations, and they have this connection to their environment that outsiders often don't have.
So it's not about imposing solutions from the top down.
Right.
It's about empowering communities to actually lead their own adaptation efforts.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But even with the best community involvement, how do we even begin to assess vulnerability? How do we know which places or which systems are most at risk from climate change?
Well, that's where vulnerability assessments come in.
Okay.
Think of them like a checkup for a community's climate health. There are these systematic efforts to identify potential weaknesses and understand, which populations, assets, and systems are most susceptible to climate impacts.
So how do these assessments work?
Well, the source material breaks down vulnerability into 3 key components.
Oh, I love a good framework.
Right. So the first component is exposure.
Okay.
This is all about how much climate change a certain place or system is likely to experience.
I see.
So think about things like sea level rise for coastal communities.
Yeah.
Or changing rainfall patterns for farmers.
Okay, so exposure is about the degree of climate change impact.
Yeah.
Got it.
What about the other 2 components?
Right, so the second one is sensitivity.
Okay.
And this is all about how severely different things will be affected by those climate changes.
Okay.
So some ecosystems are more fragile than others.
Right.
Some communities just have more resources to cope. So sensitivity is really about understanding the potential for harm. So it's not just about the intensity of the climate hazard itself. It's about how susceptible the community or ecosystem is to that hazard.
Got it.
What about the third component?
Okay. The third component is adaptive capacity.
Okay.
And this is a big one. It's all about how well a system can adjust to the changes that are happening. Can it bounce back after a disruption? Does it have the resources, the flexibility, the knowledge to change?
So adaptive capacity is like a measure of a sister's ability to roll with the punches, adapt and thrive even when things get tough. It's kind of like our tree analogy earlier.
Exactly.
A tree with strong roots and a flexible trunk has a higher adaptive capacity to weather a storm.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that these vulnerability assessments use all sorts of different tools and methods to gather this information.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Okay, so there are climate models that can project future climate scenarios.
Okay.
There are GIS systems, geographic information systems that can map out areas at risk. And then, of course, there's direct engagement with communities. to learn from their experiences and their traditional knowledge.
Right. Because sometimes the most valuable insights come from the people who live and work in these places every single day.
Exactly.
So we've got these assessments that help us understand vulnerability, but then what?
Yeah.
How do we actually translate that knowledge into action?
Right.
How do we actually build resilience?
That's where things get even more interesting. And that's what we'll be diving into next time.
Oh, can't wait.
We'll be exploring the principles and frameworks that guide climate resilience and adaptation efforts.
Okay.
And we're going to take a closer look at some case studies to illustrate how this all plays out in the real world.
I bet they'll be full of surprises and insights.
Yeah.
This is going to be fascinating.
It's fascinating how these vulnerability assessments can uncover some really unexpected results.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like one of the case studies in the source material focuses on this coastal community.
Okay.
And on the surface, they seemed, really vulnerable. Limited finances, aging infrastructure. They had a large elderly population, all in a low-lying area.
So ticking all the boxes for a classic high-risk profile.
Exactly. But what was surprising was the strength of their social networks.
Oh, wow.
This community had a real history of working together, to overcome challenges.
Right.
They had this deep sense of place, a shared identity that really fostered this strong sense of community spirit.
So their social cohesion actually became a strength,
Yeah.
helping them adapt despite all these physical and economic challenges. That's amazing.
It is. It really shows that resilience can come from unexpected places.
It does. It highlights the importance of looking beyond just the physical risks.
Absolutely. And it shows why these assessments need to dig deeper, to understand all the factors, tangible and intangible, that shape a community's resilience.
Right. So it's not just about infrastructure or economic resources. It's also about social capital, trust, those community bonds. It's about understanding the human element.
The fabric of the community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the source material also mentions a case study from an agricultural region.
Okay.
They were facing increasing water scarcity. And on paper, they seem to have high adaptive capacity.
Okay.
They had well-established irrigation systems, access to technology. They even had a history of innovation in water management.
So you'd think they'd be pretty well prepared to handle drought.
Exactly. But the vulnerability assessment revealed this long-standing lack of trust between the farming community and the government agencies responsible for water allocation.
Wow.
There was a history of, top-down decisions, and it created this sense of unfairness that really eroded people's confidence in the system.
So even with all the technical capacity to adapt, the social and political context created this huge obstacle.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that resilience isn't just about having the right tools and technology. It's also about governance, trust in institutions, equitable decision-making, all of that.
Precisely. And this case study really highlights the need to understand those historical and political forces that are at play.
Yeah.
Past injustices, power imbalances, lack of transparency. All those things can really affect a community's ability to adapt.
So we have to address those underlying systemic issues if we're serious about building genuine resilience. It's not just about treating the symptoms. It's about getting to the root causes of vulnerability.
Exactly. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, we're really talking about shifting from a reactive approach to a more proactive one.
Right.
We need to anticipate challenges, understand vulnerabilities, build adaptive capacity before disaster strikes.
It's about being prepared, not just for the specific impacts we can predict, but also for those unexpected curveballs that climate change is bound to throw our way.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, one thing that I think often gets overlooked is just how interconnected everything is. What might seem like a localized vulnerability can have these ripple effects
Oh, absolutely.
that extend far beyond that area.
One of the sources uses the example of a major port city
Okay?
that's highly vulnerable to sea level rise and storm surges.
Right.
But if that port is disrupted, it can impact global supply chains.
Oh, wow.
You suddenly have disruptions in the flow of goods and services, impacting economies far beyond that flooded coastline.
Wow. So climate change is a global issue demanding global cooperation.
It is.
It's a stark reminder that we all share a common fate here. But how do we even begin to wrap our heads around a problem this complex and interconnected? It feels overwhelming.
I think that's where systems thinking comes in.
Yeah.
We need to understand how different parts of the system interact and influence each other. The ecosystems, the infrastructure, the social networks, all of that.
Right.
Because if we just focus on individual components in isolation, we're likely to miss those crucial vulnerabilities and opportunities for building resilience.
So it's about zooming out and seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Understanding how a change in one part of the system can trigger those cascading effects throughout the whole.
Exactly. And this systems perspective is essential for developing effective adaptation strategies.
Right.
Because if we just focus on narrow technical solutions,
Yeah.
we risk creating these unintended consequences that might actually exacerbate vulnerabilities elsewhere.
So it's not just about building higher seawalls. It's about understanding that complex web of relationships that make up a resilient system.
Right.
It's about considering all the dimensions of adaptation, social, economic, ecological, making sure our solutions are holistic.
Precisely. And what's really interesting here is how the systems thinking aligns with those principles of equity and social justice we were talking about earlier. By understanding how those vulnerabilities are interconnected and how power dynamics shape resilience, we can create solutions that address those root causes of inequality, empowering those who are most affected by climate change.
So it's not just about surviving climate change. It's about crafting a more just and equitable world.
I agree. And what I find fascinating is that this vision of a just and resilient future is gaining traction in policy discussions and community initiatives worldwide. People are starting to grasp that climate adaptation isn't merely about survival. It's about building a better world for ourselves and for future generations.
That's a powerful message of hope amidst all the dire warnings we hear about climate change.
It is.
It's a reminder that we have the power to shape our future, to choose a path that leads to resilience, sustainability, a more just world.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another crucial aspect of climate resilience.
Okay.
It's not just about reacting to problems, it's about taking a more proactive and transformative approach.
So instead of just trying to hold back the tide, we need to think about how to ride the waves, so to speak.
Exactly.
How to adapt and evolve in a way that makes us stronger and more resilient over the long run.
It's about embracing change, and uncertainty, and just continuously adapting and evolving to meet those challenges as they come up. And that's where innovation becomes super crucial.
Yeah. Innovation. That makes sense.
We need to be exploring new ideas, experimenting with different approaches, really pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
I'm curious, what are some of the most exciting innovations you're seeing right now? What's giving you hope?
Oh, there's just so much happening. It's really inspiring. Like, we're seeing incredible progress in areas like climate-smart agriculture.
Okay.
Farmers are using all this new data and technology to optimize their water use, improve soil health, even develop drought-resistant crops.
So they're working with nature,
Exactly.
not against it.
And the beauty of these nature-based solutions is that they often have, multiple benefits.
Oh, yeah.
Take coastal wetlands, for example.
Yeah.
Restoring those wetlands not only protects against storm surges, but it also creates habitat for wildlife, enhances water quality, even helps sequester carbon from the atmosphere.
So many wins.
It is. We protect ourselves from climate impacts, but at the same time, we're creating a healthier planet.
Okay, but are these innovations just limited to technology and infrastructure? Or are there exciting things happening in the social and institutional realms as well?
Oh, absolutely. There are incredible innovations happening in those areas too. Communities are coming together to develop their own adaptation plans.
Oh, wow.
Using participatory processes to make sure everyone has a voice and that the solutions are tailored to the local needs.
That's so important. We can't just rely on top-down solutions.
Right.
Imposed by governments or experts.
Real resilience comes from the ground up, from people working together to create that shared vision for their future.
It seems like these grassroots efforts are driven by a deep sense of social justice and equity.
They are. There's this growing awareness that climate change disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable members of society. So people are really striving to create solutions that address those inequalities and empower those who are most at risk.
It's about more than just surviving climate change. It's about creating a more just and equitable world in the process.
It is. And what's fascinating is that this vision is gaining traction not just in local communities, but in policy circles and international collaborations as well. People are realizing that climate adaptation isn't just about damage control. It's about building a better future for everyone.
It's about shifting our mindset from scarcity and fear to one of abundance and opportunity. recognizing that we have the power to create the future we want.
Exactly. And if we connect this back to our earlier discussion about systems thinking, it really highlights that this is about a fundamental shift in our relationship with the planet.
Okay.
We need to move away from that extractive, exploitative mindset that got us into this mess in the first place and embrace a more regenerative, collaborative approach.
So instead of just trying to mitigate the damage we've already done, we need to be actively working to restore and regenerate ecosystems, building stronger, more connected communities, creating a more sustainable and equitable society.
Exactly. And that's where the principles of resilience and adaptation really come in. It's about understanding that change is inevitable, embracing uncertainty, continuously adapting and evolving to meet the challenges. It's about learning from nature, recognizing that the most resilient systems are those that are diverse, interconnected, and adaptable.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. Climate change is a global challenge that requires global cooperation, a shared commitment to building a more resilient future.
Well said. And what's really exciting is that this vision of a just and resilient future is starting to take root all over the world. People are realizing we have the power to create the future we want, and they're taking action individually and collectively to make it happen.
Well, that has certainly given me a lot to think about. A huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise and for reminding us that even though climate change is a daunting challenge, there is a lot of reason for hope.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, building a resilient future isn't just the responsibility of governments or experts. It's something we can all contribute to. Every action we take, no matter how small, can make a difference.
That's a great reminder. To all our listeners out there, I encourage you to check out the show notes. We'll have links to some incredible resources where you can learn more about climate resilience and find ways to get involved in your communities. And be sure to join us next time for the final part of this deep dive, where we'll be exploring those sector-specific adaptation strategies in even more depth. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep taking action. The future is ours to create.